Hi, my name is Nicodemus, and this is a video about how to make a good Magic the Gathering deck. I assume most of you have already know what Magic the Gathering is. It's a card game that you play, and have tried to play it or have made decks yourselves, but don't seem to really be effective with your decks. You haven't won a lot of games, you feel like you aren't having any fun with it. So this video is to help encourage you to make a better deck and give you the tools to do that. Some ideas and some concepts and some tips that may help you out so you can beat your opponents or at least have fun playing the game, make it more enjoyable for you. Some other things about me too, why I'm qualified to be able to be teaching you these sort of lessons, or that you might learn from me, is I've been playing for years, I've been teaching people to play for years, I've won many tournaments or competitions, drafts, sealed, you name it, I've played it. I've owned probably a good 70 to 80% of the cards in the game and played most of them as well. So, and I'm also the creator of what's called EasyMTG Mats. So they make the game a lot easier to play, so it might be worth checking out. So one of the easiest and most common mistakes to make while constructing a Magic deck is to have too much or too little mana cards or land cards in the deck. The objective here is to have just the right amount of mana cards to get the most use out of the spells in your deck, whether by casting them or using abilities, so that no turn goes to waste. This ideal is often referred to as the mana curve. Since you're only allowed to play one land per turn, you want to be able to cast a one caster first turn, a two caster second turn when you can play your second land, and so on as you generate mana throughout the game. Here is a breakdown of the average amount of mana producing land cards that should be in a deck according to the format you are playing. In a multicolor deck, it is also important to pay attention to the number of colored mana symbols on your spells, so that you can make sure you have enough of the right colors of mana in your deck to cast them. In order to get a better idea of how many mana symbols you have on your spells and to see how many spells of a certain type you have in the deck, it helps you to set your deck up in a grid formation, grouping all card types together so that you can make sure that one type does not outweigh the other in your deck. For instance, it might not work too well if you have too many enchant creature or aura cards in your deck and not enough creatures in the deck to cast them upon. This will also help you see the gradient of your mana curve to make sure your deck doesn't have too many high casting or low casting cards in order for it to play smoothly. Now let's take a look at how to gauge the value of a good spell. Spells in the game have a ratio to determine if it's worth the mana cost. The objective is to get the most out of a spell for the mana you put into it. Let's take creature spells for example. For each 1 mana you spend, you should get a 1 in power and toughness. Thus, a 1/1 creature for 1 mana is average. Any higher power and toughness and or abilities make this spell a much better deal for the casting cost. It also helps to look at abilities as if you were adding another +1/+1 counter to a creature, so that the more abilities a creature has, the better deal it is for the mana you spend. There are 5 guidelines that most winning decks follow that make them superior to their opponents. These in order of priority are speed, card advantage, compatibility, versatility, and knowing your opponents. Speed. Speed is the best thing a deck can have, for the player who gets to their win condition first will dominate the game. The win conditions can take all sorts of forms: lethal damage, poison counters, locks. Control and mill or peel decks are just a few methods, but the fact remains the first to get to the finish will win the race.
So cards that make the deck faster, such as mana accelerators, cheaper casting costs, or abilities like haste, should take priority in deck construction. Card advantage. There is no question about it. Having more cards in your hand will give you an advantage over your opponent. This is because the more cards you have in your hand result in having more options that you will be able to take as to what would be the most effective play given the circumstances of the game state. The odds also go up as to what you can cast given the available mana on your turn. So any cards that allow you to draw, return to your hand, or reuse should be priority in a deck over other options. Compatibility. Compatibility is the idea that your deck runs smoothly every time you play it, producing the same results by a certain turn number in a game. This is a tricky one and has a lot to do with getting your mana curve just right, as well as making sure cards do not conflict with each other in a deck. For instance, you wouldn't want to play a card like Molder Slug, an artifact destroying creature, in a deck dependent upon artifacts to function. Playtesting your deck by shuffling it, drawing possible opening hands, and playing imaginary turns is a good way to assess whether your deck is producing the desired results consistently by a reasonable time in the game. More often than not, an opponent will throw a wrench into these plans, changing your predicted and practiced outcome, which leads us to our next guideline. Versatility. Versatility in a deck can be a game saver as well as a double-edged sword, so it's important to balance out how to be versatile and not to lose compatibility and speed while doing so. When a deck has versatility, it means it can handle all sorts of opponents, situations, and formats, no matter what form they take, and still come out on top. A good way to know if your deck has versatility is to ask questions about what it can handle. Does your deck have solutions for different theme decks, such as land destruction, mill decks, control decks, life gain decks, burn decks, lock decks, and so on? Can it play its way out of a bad situation once the odds are against you? Is it adaptable enough to play in games like Emperor, Two-Headed Giant, or have different versions of it made for different formats, like Modern, Commander, or Tiny Leaders, to name a few? A deck does not need to have a direct answer to something in order for it to be versatile. As a matter of fact, most winning decks use the idea that the best defense is a good offense. So causing your opponent to worry about what you're doing more urgently than what they have going on can be just as effective, if not better, than having an answer to many different things spread throughout a deck. This is why speed and compatibility can be key to having versatility in your deck. Knowing your opponents. This is the least important guideline to making a good deck, but still should not be ignored and has served many a player well throughout the history of Magic the Gathering. In The Art of War by Sun Tzu, it says, "If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the results of 100 battles." So study not only the people you play regularly, but also study what is popular in general with Magic and players. Remind yourself, what do they always do? How do they seem to play? What are the outcomes? What are their weaknesses? And how can you exploit them? In this sense, Magic lives up to its name, as like a tarot deck, we are predicting a possible future, given from what we have learned from the past, which has tendencies to repeat itself. Don't build a deck to beat an opponent, build a deck to beat every opponent. Thanks for watching my video. I hope you learned something about making a Magic deck, or how to improve the Magic decks you already have. Stay tuned, I should be doing another channel called Mount Gaka in the future, and leave any comments in the section below.